The archive station Orion floated in the empty space between three dead stars. It was old, older than most species in the galaxy could remember. The Galactic Concord had built it 12,000 years ago to hold the things they wanted to preserve but never use again. It was a museum, a tomb, a warning wrapped in metal and glass. Commander X walked through its long corridors with his hands clasped behind his back. His scales caught the pale light and turned it into colors that had no names in human language. He was 7 feet tall and proud of every inch. His species, had been members of the Concord for 9,000 years. They had earned their place among the civilized races. The small creature walking beside him had not. Lieutenant was the first human ever assigned to the Concord fleet. She was short by standards, soft-skinned, fragile-looking. Her species had only been traveling between stars for 300 years. In galactic terms, humans were infants. Curious infants who had somehow talked their way into places they did not belong. X did not dislike her. He simply did not understand why the Concord had accepted humans so quickly. They were aggressive, emotional. They still ate the flesh of other creatures. They still fought wars among themselves. These were traits that civilized species abandoned long ago. But orders were orders. He was to show this human the archive station and make her feel welcome. This section contains the cultural records of the Methane Collective, X said, gesturing at a vast hall filled with glowing data crystals. Over there, you will find the mathematical proofs of the Eth philosophers, and beyond that door is the music of 17 extinct species, preserved forever. Nodded politely. She had been nodding politely for 3 hours. Her face showed interest, but her eyes showed something else, something X could not read. "Is there something specific you wish to see, Lieutenant?" he asked. Stopped walking. She looked up at him with those strange, round eyes that humans had, eyes that faced forward like a predator's eyes. "I heard there was a weapons collection," she said. "Old weapons, from before the Concord standardized military technology." X felt his scales tighten slightly, an involuntary reaction. "You mean the Vault of Forgotten Armaments?" "Yes, that one." He studied her for a moment. Humans and their fascination with violence. It was disappointing but not surprising. The vault contains primitive weapons from species that have either gone extinct or evolved beyond such things. It is not a popular exhibit. Most visitors find it disturbing. "I would like to see it," said. Her voice was calm and steady. X considered refusing. The vault was not restricted, but it was not advertised either. The Concord preferred to forget that there was ever a time when intelligent beings killed each other with sharpened metal, but denying her request would be rude, and rudeness was uncivilized. "Very well," he said, "follow me." They walked deeper into the station. The corridors grew older here. The metal was a different color. The lights were dimmer. They passed through sections that had not been visited in centuries. Dust floated in the recycled air. Finally, they reached a massive door made of some dark alloy that X did not recognize. Ancient symbols were carved into its surface, warnings in languages that no one spoke anymore. "The Vault of Forgotten Armaments," X announced. He pressed his hand against the security panel. The door groaned and began to open. These weapons were collected from across the galaxy over thousands of years. They represent the violent past that all civilized species have left behind. The door finished opening. Cold air rushed out, carrying a smell like old metal and forgotten time. Stepped inside. The vault was enormous. It stretched so far that the distant walls disappeared into shadow. Thousands of weapons hung in stasis fields, frozen in pale blue light, blades of every shape and size, hammers with heads as big as a human torso, spears tipped with crystal and bone, axes that looked like they could split a ship in half, curved swords and straight swords and swords with edges on both sides. X watched face as she looked at the collection. He expected disgust, perhaps fear. These were the tools of murder after all. the instruments that primitive beings used to end each other's lives before they learned better ways. But did not look disgusted. She did not look afraid. She looked like someone who had just come home. Her eyes moved across the displays with an intensity that made X uncomfortable. She walked forward slowly, her boots echoing in the vast space. She stopped in front of a long, curved blade that hung at eye level. Its edge was still sharp after all these years. "This is from the," X said, reading the information panel. "An extinct species. They died out approximately 9,000 years ago. This blade was used in their religious ceremonies, purely symbolic, of course." Did not respond. She was staring at the blade like she could see something he could not. "Lieutenant," X prompted. "May I hold it?" she asked. X hesitated. No one had ever asked to hold any of these weapons. Why would they? "I suppose there is no regulation against it, but please be careful. These artifacts are irreplaceable." He deactivated the stasis field. The blade dropped slightly before caught it. She wrapped her fingers around the grip and lifted it free from the display. X watched her hold the weapon. At first she gripped it the way the display had shown it, but then her expression changed. Her brow furrowed. She rotated the blade in her hand. She adjusted her grip once, twice, 3 times. She tested its weight by moving it slowly through the air. Something was wrong. He could see it in her face. Something about the weapon had disturbed her. "Commander," said quietly, her voice had changed. The polite tone was gone. "Why is this balanced wrong?" X did not understand the question. "I am sorry." "The balance." She held the blade up, looking at where her hand met the grip. "It is not centered for slashing. The weight is forward, and the grip is shaped for a hand that sweats. See these grooves? They channel moisture away from the palm. This is not a ceremonial blade." She turned to look at him. Those predator eyes were sharp now. "This is a weapon designed to be thrown, and someone put it in the display upside down." X felt something cold move through his chest. He looked at the blade in her hands. It looked exactly the same as it always had. But suddenly, he realized that he had no idea what he was looking at. And the human did. Commander X stood very still. He watched the human woman hold the ancient blade like she had held 1,000 blades before, like it was the most natural thing in the galaxy. "I do not understand," he said slowly. "The weapon has been in this collection for 9,000 years. Our scholars studied it. They determined it was ceremonial." Shook her head. She flipped the blade in her hand with a quick motion that made X step backward. She caught it by the grip without looking. "Your scholars never used a blade," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement. "They looked at this and they guessed. They saw the decorations on the metal and thought it was pretty. They thought pretty things are not dangerous things." She pointed to the carved symbols along the blade. "These are not decorations. They are kill markers. Each symbol represents an enemy this blade has ended. There are 43 of them." X felt his throat tighten. He looked at the symbols. They were small and precise. 43 of them, 43 lives. "How do you know this?" he asked. "Place the blade back in its display." She turned to look at the rest of the vault. Thousands of weapons waited in the pale blue light. "Because humans do the same thing," she said. "We mark our weapons too. Different symbols, same meaning." She walked to the next display. It held a long staff made of dark wood with metal caps on each end. The information panel described it as a ritual staff used in coming-of-age ceremonies. Did not ask permission this time. She deactivated the stasis field and pulled the staff free. She spun it once, twice, 3 times. The metal caps hummed through the air. Then she stopped and held it in front of her in a fighting stance. "This is a quarterstaff," she said. "The weight is distributed for maximum striking power. See how the metal caps are slightly wider on one end. That end is for bones. The narrow end is for soft targets, throat, temple, eyes." She pressed something on the staff. A blade shot out from the narrow end. It was black and sharp and cruel. And this is for when you want to make sure they stay down. X took another step backward. He had walked past that staff 100 times. He had never known it could do that. Retracted the blade and replaced the staff in its display, but she was already moving to the next weapon, and the next, and the next. She did not stop for 3 hours. Every weapon she touched told a different story than the information panels claimed. A set of decorative throwing discs were actually designed to be hurled at enemies and slice through flesh and bone. A beautiful silver hammer marked as a judge's symbol of office was actually a war hammer, weighted to crush skulls through helmets. A curved blade labeled as an executioner's ceremonial sword was actually a cavalry weapon, shaped to be used from the back of a riding animal. X followed her in silence. His understanding of the vault crumbled with every word she spoke. His people had collected these weapons. His people had studied them. His people had labeled them and organized them and put them on display. And his people had understood nothing. "How do you know all this?" he finally asked. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. "These weapons are from species that died thousands of years before your kind even existed." Stopped, she was standing in front of a massive blade, almost as tall as she was. The panel called it a monument to peace, a symbolic weapon created to celebrate the end of some ancient war. She reached up and touched the blade's edge. It was still sharp enough to draw blood from her finger. "You do not make monuments out of sharpened steel," she said quietly. "You make monuments out of stone and crystal, things that last but do not cut." She held up her bleeding finger. "This is not a monument. This is a weapon designed for one thing only." She turned to face X. Her predator eyes were dark and sad. "I know these weapons because humans never stopped using them. We invented these same weapons on our own world. We carried them into battle for 10,000 years. We killed millions of our own kind with swords and spears and axes. And when we learned to make guns and bombs, we did not throw away the blades. We kept them. We trained with them. We passed the knowledge down from parent to child." She looked around the vault at the thousands of weapons waiting in their stasis fields. "Your scholars studied these things like they were ancient mysteries, but they are not mysteries to me. I grew up training with weapons like these. My grandmother taught me the sword. Her grandmother taught her. We remember." X did not know what to say. He felt like the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. 9,000 years of scholarship. 9,000 years of careful study. And all of it was wrong because no one who studied these weapons had ever actually used one. "Why?" he asked. "Why did your species never stop? Why did you not evolve beyond this violence like every other civilized race?" Was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because we tried to stop," she said. "Many times we signed treaties, we made peace. We told ourselves that the wars were over, and every time someone broke the peace, every time the violence came back. So we learned. We learned that you cannot throw away the sword just because you wish there were no more enemies. The enemies do not care what you wish." She walked to the center of the vault and stood there, surrounded by the weapons of dead species. "You asked why humans never evolved beyond this," she said. "But I have a different question, Commander. Where are the species that made these weapons? Where are the 17 races whose weapons fill this vault?" X opened his mouth to answer, then he closed it. He did not know. "They went extinct," he said finally. "The records say they died out naturally, or they evolved beyond physical form, or they left the galaxy." Shook her head slowly. "Commander, I have seen enough weapon collections to know the difference between ceremony and war. Every single weapon in this vault was made to kill, not for rituals, not for symbols, for killing. These species were warriors, all of them." She met his eyes. "Warriors do not just disappear, so I ask you again, where did they go?" The question hung in the air like smoke after a fire. X found that he did not want to answer it. He found that he did not want to know. But he had a feeling that the answer was somewhere in this station, and he had a feeling that it was very, very ugly. Scholar was old even by the standards of his species. He breathed methane through a special mask and moved slowly through the data archives on mechanical legs. He had spent 400 years the contents of the archive station. He knew every artifact, every record, every forgotten corner of the ancient museum. He had never questioned any of it until today. Commander X had contacted him 3 hours ago with a strange request. He wanted to search the oldest records for information about the species whose weapons filled the vault of forgotten armaments, not the official summaries, not the public histories, the original records from 12,000 years ago. Had found them buried deep in the data core, files that had not been opened in, files that were marked with security codes that no longer existed, files that someone had clearly wanted to hide. Now he sat in his quarters, reading through them with growing horror, and the human sat across from him, waiting. Lieutenant had not spoken in 20 minutes. She simply sat there with her predator eyes fixed on, waiting for him to finish reading, waiting for him to say what she already knew. Finally closed the data display. His mechanical legs trembled slightly. His methane mask hissed with each breath. "They were murdered," he said. Nodded, "Tell me." Looked at Commander X, who stood by the door with his scales pale and tight against his body. The commander looked sick. Good, he should look sick. The founders of the Galactic Concord did not simply discover a peaceful galaxy, began. His voice was weak and old. They created one. 12,000 years ago, this region of space was filled with warrior species. Species who fought constantly. Species who lived and died by the blade. Species like the ones who made the weapons in the vault. He pulled up an image on the display. It showed a star map covered in red marks. The founders decided that these warrior species were a threat to galactic civilization. They were too aggressive, too dangerous, too unpredictable. They could not be reasoned with or controlled. So the founders made a decision. The image changed. It showed ships, thousands of ships, hundreds of thousands of ships, a fleet larger than anything had ever seen. They called it the cleansing, said. It lasted for 300 years. The founders hunted down every warrior species in this sector of the galaxy. They destroyed their worlds. They burned their fleets. They killed everyone. Men, women, children, eggs, seeds, everything. He paused. His methane mask hissed. 17 species. Over 4 trillion individuals. All of them erased from existence because they were too good at fighting. The room was silent, stared at the star map with its red marks. Each mark was a genocide. "And the weapons?" she asked quietly. "Trophies," said. The founders collected the weapons of each species they destroyed. They brought them here and put them on display. They told their children that these were artifacts from primitive cultures that had naturally gone extinct. They lied. They lied to everyone, including themselves, until the lie became the truth and everyone forgot what really happened. X made a sound that might have been a moan. He pressed one hand against the wall to steady himself. "This cannot be true," he said. "The Concord was founded on principles of peace and cooperation. We do not commit genocide. We are civilized." Turned to look at him with ancient, tired eyes. "We are civilized because we killed everyone who was not civilized, Commander. We have peace because we murdered everyone who knew how to make war. The Concord is not a beacon of enlightenment. It is a graveyard dressed up in pretty lights." Stood up, she walked to the display and looked at the star map. 17 species, 4 trillion deaths, 300 years of systematic extermination, and then silence, and then forgetting, and then lies. "Why did no one remember?" she asked. "Because remembering was dangerous," said. The founders knew that if their descendants learned the truth, they might ask uncomfortable questions. They might wonder if the cleansing was wrong. They might wonder if they were capable of the same violence. So they buried the truth. They destroyed records. They rewrote history. They taught their children that warrior species were primitive and that civilized species evolved beyond violence naturally. He looked at with something like fear in his ancient eyes. They believed that violence was a disease that could be cured, that if they eliminated the violent species and taught their children to be peaceful, violence would disappear forever. But it did not disappear, said. No, agreed. They simply forgot how to recognize it. Turned back to face the two aliens, X looked broken. His scales had lost their color. His proud posture had collapsed, looked tired and sad and very, very old. You killed the warrior species because they were dangerous, said, because they could not be controlled, because they lived and died by the blade. She paused. What will you do with humans? X looked up sharply, when very still. We are warriors too, continued. We never stopped fighting. We still train with swords and spears. We still teach our children to kill. By your founder's logic, we are exactly the kind of species that should be cleansed. She stepped closer to X. But here is the difference. Your founders killed 17 species over 300 years. They thought they had eliminated violence from the galaxy. They thought they were safe. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Humans have been fighting each other for 10,000 years. We have survived famines and plagues and ice ages and nuclear weapons. We have tried to destroy ourselves 100 times and failed every single time. We are still here. We will always be here. She placed her hand on X's chest, right over his heart. You cannot cleanse us, Commander. There are too many of us. We are spread across too many worlds, and we remember how to fight. We remember everything your founders tried to erase from history. She stepped back. So the question is not what you will do with us. The question is what you will do when something worse than us comes out of the dark, because your people have forgotten how to fight, and we have not. X said nothing. He could not speak. He could only stand there, broken and afraid, knowing that everything he believed about his civilization was built on bones and lies. And knowing that the human was right. News traveled fast in the Galactic Concord. Within 2 days, every major government knew what had happened on Archive Station Orion. A human had walked into the vault of forgotten armaments and torn apart 12,000 years of lies in a single afternoon. The official response was panic. Admiral arrived on the 3rd day. She came with 6 warships and a full security team. She was tall and thin, with gray scales and eyes that had never shown warmth to anyone. She had served the Conquered for 200 years, and she had spent most of that time arguing that humans were too dangerous to be trusted. Now she finally had proof. The meeting room was cold and bright. Sat at the head of the table with her security team standing behind her. Commander X sat in the corner, looking like a man who had not slept in 3 days. Scholar was present through a video link, too old and fragile to attend in person. Lieutenant sat alone on the opposite side of the table. She had refused a chair. She preferred to stand. Let me make sure I understand, Admiral said. Her voice was like ice cracking. You examined the weapons in our most sacred archive and determined that our scholars have been wrong for 12,000 years. You then used that information to uncover classified records proving that the founders of the Conquered committed genocide against 17 species. That is correct, said. And you have shared this information with Commander X and Scholar, both of whom have confirmed your findings. Also correct. Leaned forward. Her gray eyes were sharp and hard. How did you know, Lieutenant? How did a member of a species that has only been spacefaring for 3 centuries understand weapons that our greatest scholars could not identify? How did you see what we have been blind to for 12,000 years? Did not blink, she did not look away. Because humans never stopped using those weapons. We invented the same tools on our own world. We trained with them. We killed with them. We passed the knowledge down through hundreds of generations. When I picked up that blade, I recognized it immediately because I have held blades like it my entire life. A's scales tightened. You still train with primitive weapons, in this age of energy projectors and autonomous combat drones. Every day, every human colony has training halls. Every child learns the basics of hand-to-hand combat. It is part of our culture, part of who we are. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Why? Why would you waste time and resources teaching obsolete skills? What purpose could it possibly serve? Was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft and sad. Because we have learned that peace does not last. She looked around the room at the aliens who surrounded her. Beings who had never held a weapon. Beings who had never felt blood on their hands. Beings who thought violence was something that happened to other people. Humans have a long history, she continued. Longer than most species realize. We have built great civilizations, beautiful cities, incredible works of art and science and philosophy, and every single time, without exception, something has come along to destroy them. She began to pace slowly, her boots echoing on the metal floor. Sometimes it was disease, sometimes it was natural disaster, but most often it was other humans. Someone always wanted what we had. Someone always thought they could take it by force. And whenever we convinced ourselves that the wars were over, that peace had finally come, that violence was a thing of the past, we were wrong. She stopped and faced Admiral directly. We tried to evolve beyond violence. We signed treaties. We built institutions. We taught our children that fighting was wrong, but the fighting always came back. Always. So we learned a hard lesson. We learned that you cannot wish away the darkness. You cannot pretend that predators do not exist. You have to be ready. You have to stay sharp. You have to remember how to fight even when you pray you will never need to. A's jaw was tight. And what happens when a species like yours encounters a species like ours? A species that has evolved beyond violence? What stops you from simply taking what you want? Smiled. It was a sad smile with no joy in it. The same thing that stopped us from destroying ourselves 1,000 times over. We choose not to. Every day, humans wake up and choose not to kill each other. Every day, we look at the weapons in our hands and decide to put them down. That choice is harder than you think. It is easier to fight than to forgive. It is easier to hate than to understand. But we make that choice anyway because we have learned that the alternative is extinction. She stepped closer to the Admiral. You think we are dangerous because we know how to kill, but the truth is more complicated. We are dangerous because we know how to kill and we choose not to. That choice requires strength. It requires discipline. It requires a constant battle against our own nature. Your species never had to make that choice. You eliminated everyone who might have forced you to. Admiral A's scales had gone pale. Her security team shifted nervously behind her. You are saying that we are weak, she said quietly. I am saying that you are untested, replied. You have lived in peace for 12,000 years because you killed everyone who might have threatened that peace. But peace earned through genocide is not real peace. It is just the silence between wars. She turned to look at Commander X. The commander asked me a question in the vault. He asked what happens when the next great war comes and his people have forgotten how to fight it. She looked back at the Admiral. Do you want to know the answer? I said nothing. She did not move. When that day comes, you will call for help, and the only ones who will answer are the ones who still remember, the ones who never forgot, the ones who trained every day for a fight they hoped would never come. Walked to the door of the meeting room. She paused with her hand on the control panel. Humans are not your enemies, Admiral. We are your insurance policy. We are the ones who will stand between you and the darkness when it finally comes. And it will come. It always comes. She opened the door. I suggest you stop trying to figure out how to control us and start figuring out how to work with us. Because one day, you are going to need us. And on that day, you will be very glad that we never forgot how to fight. She walked out. Admiral sat in silence for a long time. The cold room suddenly felt much colder, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that the human was right. The darkness was coming, and they were not ready. 6 months passed. The conquered pretended that nothing had changed. The records that Scholar had found were classified again. Admiral returned to her fleet. Commander X was reassigned to a quiet outpost on the edge of known space. Lieutenant returned to Earth. She told no one what she had learned. There was no point. Humans already knew that the universe was dangerous. They did not need to know that their alien neighbors had once been monsters. And then the swarm woke up. No one knew where they came from. The old records mentioned them only in fragments, in warnings so ancient that everyone assumed they were myths. A hive species that consumed everything in its path. A plague of living metal and hungry flesh that had devoured entire civilizations before the conquered even existed. They had slept for 10,000 years beneath a dead moon on the outer rim. No one knew what woke them, but when they rose hungry. The first colony to fall was in Prime, 3 million gone in a single day. The distress signal lasted for 4 minutes before it cut off. When the rescue fleet arrived, they found nothing but empty buildings and bloodstains. The second colony was Station, a research outpost named after the old scholar who had died 2 months after revealing the truth about the cleansing. The swarm took it in 6 hours. They did not just kill, they consumed. They absorbed technology and flesh and turned it into more of themselves. The conquered responded with everything they had. 100 warships surrounded the third colony, A's Hope, and prepared to fight. Their weapons were the most advanced in the galaxy. Energy projectors that could cut through starship hulls, autonomous drones that could track and eliminate any target, shield systems that had held against every threat for 12,000 years. The swarm adapted in 3 minutes. Energy weapons were absorbed and redirected. Drones were infected and turned against their masters. Shields were penetrated by living metal that ate through them like acid. The conquered fleet, pride of a galactic civilization, was torn apart in less than an hour. And then the swarm began boarding the ships. Commander X was on the bridge of the cruiser Endless Peace when the first swarm creatures broke through the hull. They were nightmares made of metal and meat, with too many limbs and mouths that screamed in frequencies that drove people mad. His crew had never trained for close combat. They had never needed to. They ran. They hid. They died screaming. X locked himself in the communications room and sent a message to the only person he could think of. 3 days later, the human ships arrived. They were not elegant like conquered vessels. They were ugly and angular and covered in weapons that looked ancient by galactic standards. Chemical propellant cannons, magnetic accelerators, missile pods loaded with warheads that carried nuclear fire. And as they approached the swarm-infested station, their cargo bays opened and poured out like angry insects. Lieutenant was on the first ship down. She wore armor that covered her from head to toe. In her hands was a weapon she had taken from the archive vault 6 months ago, from a species that no longer existed, a blade that had not tasted blood in 12,000 years. The sword's name was Inheritance. She had named it herself. The crash through the wall of the station and skidded across the deck, throwing sparks. Before it even stopped moving, the doors blew open and human soldiers poured out. They did not use energy weapons. Energy could be absorbed. Instead, they carried rifles that fired metal projectiles at supersonic speeds. They carried shotguns loaded with explosive shells. They carried knives and machetes and axes made of hardened steel. And they knew how to use them. The swarm came screaming down the corridors. Metal bodies and organic horrors all merged into something that should not exist. They expected the humans to run like the others. They expected fear. They did not expect to charge directly at them with a sword in her hands. The blade sang through the air and took the first creature's head. She spun, slashed, thrust. The sword moved like it was alive, like it remembered the hands that had held it thousands of years ago. Swarm creatures fell in pieces around her. Behind her, human soldiers advanced in tight formation. Their rifles cracked and thundered. When the swarm got too close, they switched to blades and clubs and bare fists. They fought like animals. They fought like monsters. They fought like humans. The battle lasted for 7 hours. Led her team through the infested station, deck by deck, room by room. They found survivors hiding in sealed compartments, and methane breathers and a dozen other species who had never seen violence like this. The humans protected them. The humans fought for them. The humans died for them. By the time they reached the central hive, had lost half her team. Her armor was cracked and covered in swarm ichor. Inheritance was chipped and dulled from cutting through so many enemies. She was bleeding from a dozen wounds. But she was still standing. The hive queen was massive, a mountain of flesh and metal that filled the entire chamber. It screamed with 100 mouths. It reached for her with 1,000 limbs. She raised her sword. "You want to consume everything," she said quietly. "You want to wipe out all life in this galaxy." She stepped forward. "But you forgot something. You forgot that some species do not know how to give up. Some species have been fighting since the beginning of time. Some species will keep fighting until there is nothing left to fight for." The hive queen struck at her with limbs like battering rams. Dodged, she rolled, she slashed, she cut. My ancestors fought with sticks and stones against animals that could tear them apart. My ancestors fought against each other for 10,000 years and never once stopped. My ancestors built weapons that could end worlds, and they survived anyway. She was climbing the queen's body now, cutting handholds into its flesh as she went. The creature screamed and thrashed but could not shake her loose. "You are old, you are powerful, you have devoured civilizations." She reached the queen's central mass. 100 eyes stared at her with hatred and hunger. "But you have never faced humanity." She drove inheritance through the queen's core with both hands. The blade sank to the hilt. The queen screamed one final time. And then it died. Commander X found 3 hours later. She was sitting on the floor of the hive chamber, surrounded by dead swarm and dead humans. Inheritance lay across her knees, its edge black with ichor. She looked up at him with tired eyes. "You came," she said. X looked at the carnage around him. Humans had done this. Humans with their primitive weapons and their animal ferocity. They had done what the entire conquered fleet could not. "You asked me once," said, "what happens when war comes and you have forgotten how to fight?" She looked at the sword in her hands, a weapon from a dead species, a weapon that the conquered's founders had tried to erase from history. "You call us, and we remember for you." X knelt beside her. For the first time in his life, he understood. Violence was not a disease. It was not a sign of primitiveness. It was a tool, a terrible tool, but a necessary one. A tool that had to be maintained and remembered and passed down through generations. The conquered had forgotten that lesson. They had tried to erase violence from the galaxy, and when violence came back, they had nothing to fight it with. But the humans remembered. The humans always remembered. "Thank you," X said quietly. Looked at him, her predator eyes were soft now, tired, human. "Do not thank us," she said. "Help us. Learn from us. Remember what we remember, because there will always be something out there in the darkness, and when it comes you will need to be ready." She looked at Inheritance one more time. "We cannot carry this burden alone forever. One day you will have to carry it too." X nodded slowly. He reached out and touched the blade. It was cold and heavy and real. "Then teach us," he said. Smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "That is all we ever wanted to hear." And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, the universe continued to turn. Old threats slumbered. New threats waited to be born. The galaxy was full of dangers that civilized species had forgotten about. But humanity remembered. Humanity would always remember.